See, we have a nice group. My name is Agnieszka Carpenter, and I'm the Executive Director of Maine. Maine is the organization that puts together Maine Bioscience Day. And I wanted just to say hi to everybody. And today we're talking to Chuck Lubelczyk from MMCRI. We're going to be talking about ticks. I see that some of you are already saying hi in chat. Hi. So the chat box is on. Feel free to say what schools you're from, and then leave any questions you have for Chuck in that chat box. And we're going to start with Chuck introducing himself and his work.
Sure. So our lab at the Maine Medical Center does a lot of work with ticks and mosquitoes. And we are concerned with ticks and mosquitoes because they are transmitters of disease, such as Lyme disease or West Nile virus, to both people and pets. And my work primarily works in the field. So I spend a lot of time in the woods, a good part of the year, collecting ticks and mosquitoes, but also working with wildlife that might host the ticks. So things like mice, chipmunks, deer, moose, and migratory birds like robins and sparrows.
Okay. And did you always want to work with animals?
From a very young age, yes. I really had a passion for working with wildlife, and used to get into trouble by feeding the chipmunks and squirrels in our backyard with chocolate a lot as a kid.
Is that safe?
Well, at the time, probably not, but I was a kid and didn't really pay attention to that. So, I did find out that they liked expensive chocolates more than the cheap chocolates, though. So.
But is it safe for the animals?
Oh, I think in probably small doses, it probably is fine. But yeah, they probably shouldn't be given chocolate on a regular basis. So.
But everybody deserves a treat from time to time, right?
Yes, sometimes, yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned that you work with ticks and research them. What do you actually research in them?
So with ticks and mosquitoes, we find that both are what we call vectors. So that means they transmit disease to both people and pets. And so we are tracking where they're distributed across the state, and what allows them to emerge and become a problem. So things like climate change, things like development of the landscape. So areas that go from woods to housing developments, or things like farm fields to woods, can impact where ticks and mosquitoes are found. And so we work with that, as well as looking at the different diseases that they carry.
Okay. So I have some questions that came actually in advance, and I'm going to start asking them, but I encourage everybody, any questions you have about ticks or mosquitoes or being a scientist, please leave them in the chat. So the first question I have here is, how many diseases have you discovered in ticks? Or have you discovered any?
Yes, so we actually have 5 different diseases that occur in Maine that we know about. There are probably more, because certainly we do a lot of our work in relation to where people are, but we have a lot of Maine that is undeveloped. And there's probably a lot that goes on there that we don't know because we don't travel there a lot. But we know that we have 5 diseases that occur in ticks. Lyme disease is the most common, but we have another one called anaplasmosis, which is also very common in both people and dogs, as well as cats. And then we have 2 or 3 others that are a lot more rare in the state.
Mm-hmm. So in Maine, if you go hiking or you go to the woods, is there a particular season that's worse than others, in terms of either getting a tick or getting infected?
Yeah. So with people, the biggest time of risk is actually June, July, and early August. That is when the ticks are very small. They're about the size of the head of a pin, and they're very hard to see. So people generally don't find them on them. It's important to get ticks off as soon as you can, because Lyme disease, for instance, is generally transmitted after the tick is feeding on you for about 24 to 36 hours. So the earlier you get the tick off, the better it is. However, veterinary cases of Lyme disease, so things that might happen in dogs or tick-borne diseases in cats, tend to be associated with the fall and early spring, when the adult ticks, these are the grown-up ticks, are out, and they tend to like our pets more. And so that is when usually we have canine cases of Lyme disease being discovered.
Mm-hmm. So the little ones like people better, but the big ones like dogs better, or animals?
That Generally, generally, yeah.
Mhm. Okay, oh, I see a question in the chat from Madeline, and the question is, do you also study people and animals already given the diseases, so already infected?
We work with some of the wildlife that will host the ticks. And in science, we have something called a reservoir. So a reservoir for disease is where the disease will hang out in nature. And it's similar to like a reservoir for a water supply. So it's where the body of water comes from. And we study a lot of the wildlife hosts that are reservoirs for these tick-borne or mosquito-borne diseases. And so for tick-borne diseases, generally rodents are important. So things like mice, chipmunks, and squirrels, and some migratory birds. And for a lot of the mosquito-borne diseases, they tend to be birds such as robins and sparrows and warblers tend to be very important.
Mhm. I actually didn't know that birds can get infected, so that's new information for me. Okay, another question about Lyme disease. How many people that are bitten by ticks generally come down with Lyme disease? Can you
Uh,
estimate?
yeah, so when people are bitten by ticks, again, if the tick is removed for 24 to 36 hours, the chance of getting Lyme is a lot lower. Um, Most people in the summertime hopefully find the ticks that are on them. In general, it's thought to be about maybe 5% of the people that get a tick bite actually come down with Lyme. So again, you have to have an infected tick bite you in the first place, and then the tick needs to be on long enough to transmit the disease. So
Right. That doesn't sound so bad, although it's still dangerous.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I see some questions coming in here. One from Sarah. Is there a climate or environment that ticks cannot live in?
Yes, that's a good question. So, and again, if we're talking about ticks, we're going to be talking about the tick called the deer tick or the black-legged tick. That is the one that causes Lyme disease. And this tick, we kind of think of it as having, if folks remember the fairy tale about Goldilocks, you know, Goldilocks didn't like her porridge too hot or too cold or that. Ticks don't like it if it's too hot or too cold or too wet or too dry. So they like generally wooded areas where you have a lot of leaves on the trees. And then they like an area with a lot of shrubs. And that generally protects the ticks from dry conditions. They don't like being in areas with a lot of sun and a lot of wind. So open grassy areas like a lawn that's mowed tend to not have a lot of ticks on them. Areas that are open, like a lot of parks where you have a lot of exposed sunlight, generally don't host a lot of ticks, but you can find ticks on those areas around the parks or your lawn where you have wooded edge.
Yeah, I have a wooded edge in my yard, and that's where my dog usually gets his ticks.
Yeah,
He comes all the
right.
time.
Yeah, yep.
And so what happens with ticks in the wintertime?
So right now, we actually are still in the fall, but we are still collecting ticks right now because it has been such in general, a mild fall, other than the last couple of days. So we are doing a lot of survey work across the state, and we're finding that especially in southern Maine, where I am in the mid coast, it's about 45, close to 50 degrees right now, and that's fine for the ticks to be out. If it stays mild, the ticks will actually be active into sometimes December and January if we don't have a lot of snow and it stays in the upper 40s or low 50s. When it gets really cold, though, the ticks go down under the leaf litter in the woods and they just hunker down and hibernate all the entire winter. And then they come back out in the spring as soon as it gets warm enough.
Hmm. Okay. Um, Another question about ticks is what type of tick is worse? So maybe what you mentioned the deer tick. We also talked about, the sizes. So maybe talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So with deer ticks, the ones that are out in the summertime, you can think of them as being the teenage life stage of the tick that we call nymphs, and they're about the size of the head of a pin, so they're quite small, and people generally don't find them as easily. They tend to cause the most human cases of Lyme disease, but there's also a couple of reasons for that. In the summertime, when those ticks are out, we're wearing shorts, we're wearing sandals a lot, and the ticks have ready exposure to our skin to bite us. In the fall, the adult ticks are a little larger. They're about the size of an apple seed, and they do get on people, and they certainly get on pets. but we don't see as many cases of human Lyme disease then. Some of it is that people are actually wearing clothing. We have long sleeves, we have long pants, shoes, and socks that we're wearing, which prevents the ticks from biting us at that time. So generally, the summertime is the worst time for deer ticks.
Okay. And then what's the most deadly disease that you can get from a tick? Maybe something that doesn't occur in Maine, or is it just Lyme?
Yeah, so we actually have a disease that's a virus. So Lyme disease is actually a bacterial disease that you can get antibiotics for and help to cure it. But we have an actual viral disease called Powassan virus, or also known as deer tick virus, that occurs in Maine. We actually had someone die of it in 2013 up along the coast. It's rare, but it does occur, and we have maybe 1 to 2 cases a year that we might see. And it's a viral disease that can cause encephalitis, which is a swelling of the brain, and so that can actually leave people with long-term neurologic problems if they get this virus. But it is very rare, but does occur in Maine and a lot of other parts of New England.
So since we're talking about carrying diseases, what about mosquitoes? Should we be scared of mosquitoes? What can we get from them?
Yeah. Mosquitoes are actually in some ways a little bit more serious because they only carry, at least for us, they only carry viral diseases. So they carry a disease called West Nile virus, which occurs across a lot of the US. And then they also carry a disease called Eastern equine encephalitis virus, or we also call it triple E. And although both of these diseases do affect horses, they are also very severe when they affect people. And they tend to occur, at least in the Northeast, around August into September for us. Those tend to be the highest risk times. And generally, we see that diseases like triple E tend to occur in years where we have more rain. So a year like 2019, where we had a lot of rain in June and July, really ramped up the mosquito numbers a lot. And we ended up having a lot of cases in the Northeast, especially in states like Massachusetts and Rhode Island, where they had several cases reported, including some fatalities, actually, that happened in people.
That's scary. So should we be protecting ourselves from mosquitoes and ticks, and how to do this?
Yeah, so the easiest way to do it is to dress appropriately. So if you're out in the woods, and although it is kind of annoying to have to wear long sleeves in very hot weather in June and July, as much as you can, wearing long sleeves are the kind of the best and first line of defense that you can have. Putting socks on, and because a lot of tick bites occur from the ankle area on up. And so putting socks on will help to protect your leg area. Tucking your pants into your socks if you have long pants and socks on is a good idea. Most tick bites tend to occur around the homes rather than when you're out hiking or taking the dog for a walk or going biking or running. And I think a lot of this is because people don't think to protect themselves when they're out and around their homes. You run out in the woods for 5 minutes, or you're out walking your dog in your yard, and you really don't think about protecting yourself, as opposed to when you're out recreating, when you're out playing outside. You may actually treat your pants or your clothing with repellents, such as DEET, and you may do tick checks more if you're actually out doing recreation. But when you're out in your yard for 30 seconds or a minute or 5 minutes, that's kind of when you get exposed, and that tends to occur a lot, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, I'm looking at the questions. They're coming in. There's a question from Abigail. How do you find the diseases from mosquitoes?
So we actually have a lab in Maine that is run by the state government, and they actually do a lot of high-risk diseases. So they look for West Nile virus and triple E in mosquitoes, but they also test things like rabies in wildlife. And so this lab up in Augusta, called the Health and Environmental Testing Lab, will actually test the mosquitoes that we collect, and they do a technique called PCR, which is a technique that looks for the DNA of the viruses in mosquitoes. And they tell us where these mosquitoes are positive. We sample across the state. So we have people all the way up north in Fort Kent, all the way down south in Kittery, over to areas of down East Maine as well that are collecting mosquitoes all summer. And these are sent into the state for testing. And they tell us where we have positives and where we don't have positive mosquitoes.
So you mentioned that you spend a lot of time in the woods, but then you also spend time in the lab, right? So what's the ratio for you? What's your typical day?
My typical day is, it depends what we're doing for work. If we are working, for instance, on a bird survey, the time of day to get up is really early. And so we frequently get up before dawn and we get out in the woods very early around sunrise because that's sometimes when the birds are most active. And we may have a very early day starting at 5 a.m. And that may end sometime around 2 or 3 in the afternoon. We're spending the entire day out in the field collecting live birds. And then we check those birds over for ticks, maybe take a blood sample, and then release them. If we're having a normal day in the lab, we probably get to the lab about 8 o'clock in the morning. We are frequently processing ticks and mosquitoes there all day long. And that's kind of a normal sort of 9 to 5 kind of day. But when we're doing work in the field in the woods, the hours are very variable. And a lot of it depends on the animals that we're working with at the time.
Mm-hmm. I have one question that I ask all of our presenters this year, and it is, do you have to do a lot of writing in your job? And was it hard to find a job in bioscience?
So I do a lot of writing. I write a lot of scientific publications, but then we also do a lot of grant writing. And then because we do a lot of work on public lands, so things that might be owned by the U.S. Forest Service or the National Park Service, like Acadia National Park, they require reports at the end of the year asking for the results of our survey. So we do a lot of report writing in the wintertime for these agencies that need their reports back. And then we do grant writing because we need to have funds coming into the lab to support our staff. And so all of us in the lab kind of contribute to the grant writing that goes on as well. It took a little while to get a job in the biosciences. My background's in wildlife. And so I actually started out initially getting the first couple of jobs looking at forest fires in New Hampshire, and then came into sort of this job a few years later. And I think with some of these jobs, they are very tough to get because the funding is never fantastic for a lot of bioscience jobs, unfortunately, especially when you are dealing with things like endangered species. The funding and the support for that is sometimes not great, especially the last few years. But generally, jobs that are dealing with health, either animal or human health, tend to be a bit better funded, and there tends to be a little bit better job stability in those areas.
So you found a way to work with animals, but technically it's for human health, right?
That is technically it, but we look at a lot of the tick and mosquito-borne disease world as kind of being like a kind of like a spider web, if you think of it. There's all these different strands that connect the web together. So with tick-borne disease, for instance, we worry about human medicine, we worry about veterinary medicine, we worry about wildlife science, but also climate and things like forestry. So certain forest types are better for ticks and than others. And so it's sort of a very mixed bag of different professions that come together to form this job. So if folks are really interested in working on things like this, really veterinary science is a big area. We work with a lot of veterinarians. Then also doing work with computer science is also important as well, because we do a lot of data analysis in addition to our field science and lab science.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're just going across all kinds of disciplines.
Yeah, we actually have had come through the lab either for students or for interns or also scientific staff that have helped us. We have everything from veterinarians to mathematician people to wildlife science to doctors to nurses that we've worked with. So a wide variety of folks can work in this area.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going back to my questions here. There was one question about red meat that intrigued me because I didn't know what this was about. This is from Brady, but then I think I know what Brady means. So he's asking about getting allergic to red meat from a Lone Star tick. Is it true? And if so, can you tell me more?
Yes, so there is a tick that occurs in the southern part of the US that's moving up the eastern seaboard. So a long time ago, it was really centered around Florida, Texas, Oklahoma, Virginia, Georgia. And that tick has slowly been moving up the coast a lot. And now we are hearing that it is over in Cape Cod in Massachusetts and is established in Connecticut. And it's probably marching its way slowly up to northern New England. And it may get here in the next decade. And this tick is called the Lone Star tick. It's a very aggressive tick. It's one of the few ticks that have eyes that can actually see its host. So it will actually turn and follow you through the woods to get on you. So it's kind of creepy in that regard. And where it gets established, it's hyper abundant. Like I can't even tell you the reports I hear, but the people that work with this in New York say that you can hear the leaves rustling with them. There's so many of them out in the woods where they get established. But it's been reported that when this tick bites people, there can be a chance of it triggering an allergic reaction that makes you allergic to red meat. And the meat can be from any kind of hoofed mammal. So it could be anything from beef, venison from deer. It could be pork. It could be, if you like goat, you can't eat goat meat. It doesn't affect people eating chicken or fish, but certainly any kind of mammal that has a hoof, you can't eat the meat of that animal.
I don't know about you guys, but that gave me chills. I don't know. Thank you, Brady, for that question. I did not know about the Lone Star tick. So is it because of the climate warming up, similarly to lobster or to sharks moving towards Maine? So that tick that's normally in warmer climates is moving its way up?
Yeah, I think that's a lot of it with this Lone Star tick because it's historically occurs in the southern U.S. and really occurs from the southern U.S. down into Mexico, and it's very adapted to warm climates. And we found with a bit of study work, with some experimental studies in southern Maine, that this tick can survive our winters, at least in southern Maine right now. So in areas like Cumberland and York County, if this tick were to get established, it would have no problem surviving year round here. And that's actually very troubling because once this tick gets established, it's kind of a game changer in a lot of ways on the landscape. And it becomes a big public health and veterinary issue. And even if there's no disease or allergic reaction, just the fact that there could be thousands of them out there make them a real nuisance to people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's scary. Okay, another question here that I find interesting. Are ticks like mosquitoes when it comes to blood type?
No, they don't really worry about that so much, about the type of blood. Really, they like. I think the way to look at us is ticks and mosquitoes don't really worry about differentiating us from dogs, from deer, from cats. We're just big bags of mammalian tasty blood that they like. And so they don't really differentiate a whole lot. They do, however, tend to hone in a lot on CO2. So mosquitoes especially will follow people. And the more people off gas CO2, either from heavy breathing or from possibly from diet, that might make them more attractive to mosquitoes, however.
Mm-hmm. Because is it true that mosquitoes like certain people better than others because of the composition of their blood?
I think they do like certain people. I don't think they know why, but it could be such things as diet. Certainly certain diets will allow you to off gas things like lactic acid in some ways, and so that can also be attractive to some of these arthropods. So ticks and mosquitoes can both be attracted to that. So in some cases, diet. There probably is something that makes some people more attractive to ticks and mosquitoes, but they haven't found out what that is yet, actually.
That's interesting. Okay, I have time probably for one more question, and we're circling back to our Lone Star tick.
Sure.
And the question is, how does this tick look like compared to our current ticks? You mentioned it has eyes. What about the size and the overall look?
It's a bigger tick. It actually moves really fast. We've only had a couple that we've collected in the woods the last decade in Maine. And boy, when we find this tick, it is really noticeable the way it moves. It has sort of a jittery, fast movement to it. It has a white dot on the back that some people think looks like the state of Texas, which is why it's called the Lone Star tick. But it's actually a fairly large tick when you see it. It's about at least 3/16 of an inch. So pretty good size, and a lot different looking than the deer tick that we have here. A lot of people do confuse it with the dog tick, which is a common tick that we have in the spring here. And the only thing to confuse it with right now.
Someone asked, can you show us a picture? So I'm going to show you guys a picture because I just pulled it up. I'm curious myself. Can you guys see it? This is
some people with imagination think that white dot on the back looks like the state of Texas. I don't think it does. people do. But that's really, yeah, what to look for. Yeah.
But I think that name Lone Star Tick is just so cool. Anyway, thank you so much.
Yeah.
This is very informative. I hope we didn't scare anybody. We can still go enjoy the woods in Maine. And I wanted to thank everybody for being part of Maine Bioscience Day this week and wish you a really nice Friday and a great weekend. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.